50% tariffs on aluminum and steel coming from Canada to the United States. What is your response?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this tariff conversation is really unfortunate. We've been long partners, friends, allies, and our economic relationship has benefited both parties. So these tariffs are actually going to create pain on both sides of the border. I would say for Americans, we're already seeing domestic steel prices go up significantly as a result. And the United States only produces 20% of the aluminum it consumes. So you're tariffing things that you're going to have to import at a higher price. So to be honest with you, the economics around this are bad for both parties, and I think we got to get back to having a better conversation about how we work together.
This is in response to Ontario charging electric tariffs to basically the Northeast and some parts of the Midwest. Do you support that decision that they made?
Well, I mean, the United States and Canada, we are a federation, so we have state level and we have federal actors. We responded to President Trump's decision to move forward with tariffs with a very select group of products that we were actually looking to retaliate. And those were largely products that there are American firms that sell those products in Canada for which there are reasonable alternatives. We had not moved down the path of energy or critical minerals or any of those things, although we've said those tools are on the table down the road if we can't find a pathway out. Premier Ford is working in his own area of jurisdiction. He's been pretty forthright in terms of feeling pretty aggrieved about the imposition of tariffs. And I would say that he is acting within his sphere of authority. I think we all are desirous of not escalating this and finding ways to move away from this. So,
if I read between the politician lines, it feels like, no, you didn't like the escalation, but there's nothing you can actually do about it. What does that conversation evolve to be?
Well, I'm not sure I'd say exactly that. I understand Premier Ford's frustration. I mean, to be honest with you, all Canadians are feeling pretty shocked that Canada's being treated in a manner that is actually worse than China. I'm not sure exactly how Canada got into that position with a country that, has always been a friend. So I think, President Ford, Premier Ford and others are responding in a manner that shows their frustration. I think Premier Ford has been an enormously important actor and a constructive one for Canada. And so all I'm saying is different provinces can take different steps. And you've seen that even with liquors. There are some provinces that have banned American liquor and some that actually have not.
And that will continue. The provinces will still have that authority to be able to implement. How do we calm this down right now?
Well, I think we need to try to find ways to get back to a conversation about how we create more benefit by working together. So I've been pitching this concept of a critical minerals alliance, which is really about a number of very specific projects that would allow us to help the United States with some of the needs it has, reduce dependence on China. China is our common adversary, but would do so in a manner that actually would create economic benefit on both sides of the border as a bit of an off-ramp away from this conversation about tariffs. I continue to pitch that. I met with Secretary Wright this morning, and we had the conversation about that.
Was he receptive? Did he listen?
Well, he listened. He's a very smart guy. I mean, and he's actually somebody who knows Canada well. He used to run a company that had operations in Canada. I think we're all desirous of finding a pathway back to a more constructive conversation, because at the end of the day, this is going to be lose-lose.
Is there a dollar? How far are you along in those conversations about a critical minerals deal?
Well,
ninth inning?
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about isn't a broad-based critical minerals package. It's basically a number of very discrete projects that we could execute on in the relatively short term that would create benefit. And so, those are the kinds of projects that actually could come to fruition quite quickly. But in order to do that, we need to actually stop with the tariff conversation and start with the more constructive conversation.
Do you have a dollar amount of what that might look like?
I don't have a dollar amount, but let me give you a couple of examples. So in British Columbia, there is a resource company that actually provides germanium to the United States. It actually uses product from a mine in Alaska, it processes it in British Columbia, and it provides it to the United States. There is an investment that could be made in that facility to massively expand the amount, to be able to actually supply the entire American market. It's probably a couple $100 million, maybe a little bit more. It's not a huge number. Or in the nuclear space, we could actually help you displace all of the uranium you get from Russia, including enriched uranium, and that actually would require us some investment in conversion and enrichment facilities in the United States. But those are the kinds of things. We're not talking billions and billions of dollars, and we are talking about greatly enhancing energy security.
And you would need to see the tariffs totally come off for those conversations to get real.
I think
realer.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we need to see the tariffs come off in order to have a more constructive conversation.
On the flip side, you could see tariffs on lumber and dairy also coming down the pipeline. What's your plan for that?
Well, I mean, look, there already are tariffs on lumber, on softwood lumber. They've been in place now for a number of years.
Bigger ones.
And that's obviously had some impacts, and the United States has actually not been successful when it's actually gone to an arbitration. But that will just make the challenges for the forest sector worse. In terms of dairy, Canada exports virtually nothing into the United States, so tariffs on dairy are unlikely to be very impactful for the Canadian economy.
But is the tit for tat something that we think continues?
Well, I am very desirous of ensuring it doesn't, because we don't want this to escalate. We don't want to get into a situation where we're just hurting each other more and more and more. But I would tell you, in the aftermath of the decision by the United States or President Trump to impose tariffs, like, Canadians were initially shocked. Now they're really angry. And I don't want us to get down the path to where we actually are not able to even have reasonable conversations because our citizens are so mad at each other. Why would we do that? Like, at the end of the day, most of us have family, friends in the United States, and the same is true for Americans in Canada. We need to get back to a more constructive conversation.
On the economic side, if we continue to see tariffs, obviously the production and the price in Canada will have to fall to compensate for the tariffs, so there's still a market for that metal or oil or gas, what have you. If it doesn't happen, or if it falls really low, like, are we going to see producers shut in capacity? Have you had those conversations?
Well, it depends sector by sector and almost product by product. In many cases, the prices are going to be paid by American consumers, not by Canadian producers, and they will simply have to eat the tariffs. Like, on aluminum, as I say, 20% of the need in the United States is produced in the United States. Canadian aluminum producers are not going to eat the tariff. It's going to be people who are building cars and building planes and those kinds of things. There will be sectors certainly that will be impacted. I would say steel is one that we are concerned about, and we may see that there are economic impacts in Canada, but there will be in the United States too. Like,
sure.
people, everything that you are building here uses steel that now is higher priced because of the tariffs.
Would the government have to support those producers that would struggle?
That's certainly a conversation we're having, and we just brought in a package that would provide support, particularly to workers who may be affected, but yeah.
The other option longer term is to diversify where you export, which has been a conversation, obviously, in terms of how you even get stuff out to Asia, for example. Could we ever see an east to west pipeline financed by the government? Like, is that something that's now potentially on the table?
I think it depends a little bit on what transpires with the tariffs. I would say that in the universe where oil continues to flow to the United States, and I think there are very strong structural economic reasons to believe that to be true, the argument for an east-west pipeline in Canada would be as much about national security and energy security as it would actually be about a business case that would support that. That is certainly something that's an option. I mean, Canada has parts of its country where we are served by pipelines that run into the United States and back up. But those conversations only really become relevant if, in fact, we can't find a pathway out and this whole situation gets worse. And that's not what I think any reasonable person wants.
But it does feel that even if it gets better with the U.S., like, maybe that needs to happen anyway, just in terms of diversification on your exports. If Canada paid for it, would it be an export tax? Like, is that something that's on the table?
So we're not that far down the road, but we certainly are having the conversation around diversification. For many products, that's about the railways and the ports, right? For gas, it's actually about the LNG facilities that we're already constructing. And for oil, I think that's a legitimate conversation that Canadians are going to need to have.
In terms of expanding capacity of other pipelines, for example, there was a recent expansion of the Trans Mountain expansion pipeline, but that is selling out real fast. Like, is there any expansion capacity that you do have on pipelines?
There is. The Trans Mountain pipeline, we could augment it, not hugely. It's probably another 400,000 barrels with a few changes. So that's certainly something that's on the table. The Enbridge Mainline and some of the pipelines that run into the United States could actually be augmented in partnership if we actually find pathways through this. But of course, right now, in the tariff conversation, we're probably more interested in pipelines that actually allow you to export somewhere else.
No, fair enough. The conversation in the markets obviously has been very much around recession, growth worries, tariff worries, etc. What are the conversations along those lines that you guys are having?
Well, I mean, we're all watching what's happening to the stock market. I mean, it's been pretty brutal for investors. And that's partly because people understand how detrimental these tariffs are going to be on both sides of the border, but it's partly because of the uncertainty about what happens tomorrow and what happens the day after that and what happens the day after that. We need to get back. I mean, President Trump is a business person. I'm a business person. At the end of the day, you need to provide certainty going forward in order for your economy to work effectively. And I think we need to get back to a place where people are certain about what's going to happen tomorrow and the day after and the day after that.